Oh boy, here we go. No power. There it goes, back in power. Hey, welcome to Vortex Garage. 13 miles. 13 miles is all it took for this car to break. And that's really what the point of this video is going to be today, is a bit of an ownership update to talk about what broke after 13 miles and really what's broken in general. But the idea of it breaking at 13 miles, which is kind of a spooky number, especially the day before Halloween, has me wondering, could this car be cursed? Or is it just being a cat? Now, we all know cats are kind of finicky and, well, they sort of do what they want. So it does make me wonder if, well, maybe that's all that happened here. So a little bit of backstory on what occurred 13 miles after my first fill-up. So I guess not technically 13 miles into the ownership experience. It was probably more like 20 miles. But at any rate, I was staring at the trip odometer with 13 on it and going down a 2-lane road, 55 mile an hour. And there's a left turn coming up and the car in front of me puts its brakes on. I think they're going to turn. So I get out of the throttle, tap the brakes a little bit, and they decide they're going to keep going straight. So I get back in it and the car wants none of it. The car just starts bucking. It has no power. It's not moving. The tachometer is kind of bouncing all over the place. It doesn't seem to be responding to the throttle input. And I'm like, okay, this thing's dying. I'm looking for a place to pull over. I see a turn lane I can pull into. And then all of a sudden, it's perfect. Comes back, takes off, has plenty of power, drives the rest of the way to where we're going with no issue. We even drove it home that night with no problems, but I did admit to babying it a little bit. Now, I took the car out after that and fortunately brought the cameras along because I wanted to reproduce what happened, because mainly I wanted to see, was it being a cat and was it just angry and it was a fluke? Or did we actually have something wrong? Well, let's go ahead and show you a little bit of driving experience that'll be interrupted by a bit of this car braking. It's actually quite a nice day to be out cruising. Seem good. But this car is so nice to drive. It's very smooth. It's got decent power. The engine's smooth, but more importantly, the seats are extremely comfortable, and that means a lot. I feel these seats are more comfortable than, well, just about any modern car. I mean, they're so hard nowadays. Everyone wants to have sport seats, and these aren't bad. They're not necessarily flat, but I mean, they kind of are compared to sport seats, but they're really comfortable, and that's what matters. Comfort. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy the ride. Oh boy, here we go. So hear that clunk and that thunk, and it won't come out of it. No power. There it goes, back in power. I really feel like that's got to be transmission. That was weird. The engine was running, but it really clunked, like it was really confused. So I feel like that's transmission for sure. And let's see here, put it in neutral. Engine seems fine, has power. That was strange. Oh, no. It's struggling a little bit, pulling out there. All right. We just had a hiccup at taking off, so something's not right. And it wasn't a confused transmission, maybe. That's what I originally thought when I felt it. I felt like I got out of it, got back into it a little bit, and it just was like, it fell over on its face. So I thought maybe the transmission was stuck between, you know, wanting to downshift versus not, and was confused. So they kicked down, valve body, fluid issue, something like that. But pulling out of there, that felt like the same hiccup. So I think what we're going to do is go turn around and baby this thing back to the shop before we end up needing a tow truck. So all right, so we're back in the shop. I didn't take the direct route. I actually took a longer way home because, well, a good tip, if you are keen to bring random cars home occasionally without much warning, it's also not bad to bring random breakfast home without warning too. Always a good thing. It's called balance, I think. But anyway, we made it back, and well, we'll talk about what's going on a little bit later in this video. All right, the Jag's already broken. See, we're at operating temperature. Operating temp, we just went for a good drive. This is, don't worry about that. Come on now. There you go. See, that works. But our temp, we're at operating temperature. Now watch the fan. Now that should be a clutched fan, and I'm assuming it's a heat-driven mechanical clutch. It looks like one, like any other car would have. And, well, that would mean it should be pretty tight against the clutch. Does not look like it is, so I think that clutch is probably failing. And it's nice and cool out today, so we didn't overheat driving or anything, but I could see in summer traffic that would cause a heating issue, or a cooling issue, I should say. Also, we're going to be doing cooling system maintenance anyway, but look at that, we got a little leak out of the cap here. We're going to be putting a cap on anyway, so no big deal. The biggest issue that I have is I just finished checking the transmission fluid, and our transmission fluid is down a little bit. Probably something I should have checked before taking it for a drive, but we'll do a fluid service on it and a filter service. If you see all this dirt here, I went cruising with the windows open, and the headliner decided to come down. I knew it was coming down, and basically the reason these come down is because the foam-backed cloth, the foam basically turns to dust, which basically destroys any adhesive, because the adhesive was attached to the foam, which turned into this, and now there's none of that left. So we'll be pulling the headliner out to do it, but just looking down, I don't know if you can see all the way to the ground, we're already dripping a lot of power steering fluid, so it looks like that pinion leak on our rack is a larger problem because it is leaking pretty profusely. We'll do the transmission service. We've got parts that have been arriving to do an ignition service. We'll figure out how to check the timing and make sure the timing's right. Looks like we're going to do a fan clutch. We'll check out all the other systems. I'll go through again and double check every vacuum hose, make sure we don't have any vacuum leaks. And other than that, we'll go through. But that's just the latest of where we're at. All right, so as you can see from those videos, we definitely have an issue. I've been able to reproduce this problem a couple times now. In fact, we've actually really put about 60 miles on the vehicle. So one thing we'll do today is sort of talk about what that might be and what we're going to do to solve it. So first off, let's talk about this issue and why this could be a real pain compared to a newer vehicle. Now, this car has Lucas digital fuel injection. It's a multi-port fuel injection setup that's very similar in design to what you might see in a more modern vehicle. But what this 1983 example is lacking that a newer car would have is an onboard diagnostic system, or OBD2, which came in 1996 and on in the US vehicles. And it really gives a much easier time for troubleshooting problems like this in modern cars. Let's say, for example, I was driving my town car and it did this exact same behavior. I would take my computer, I would hook into my OBD2, and then I would pull all the PIDs I wanted. I would say, okay, well, it could be fuel, it could be ignition, it could be transmission. So I want to pull PIDs on the transmission ranges, the throttle position. I want to get the fuel pump. I want to see the fuel pump duty cycle. I want to see the fuel rail pressure. I want to see the fuel injector pulses. And I'd like to see the ignition to see if we've got any misfire. And I want to see the knock sensor data to see if it's pulling any timing. I would set all those PIDs up and I would go for a drive. It would go blip, blip, blip. And then I would go, sweet, I got it. Come back, fire the computer up. I'd look at all the graphs. With all that data in place in that one drive, in that one computer connection, I would be able to see how all of those systems are interacting when that problem occurred, and I could deduce from that with hard data what's wrong. So basically the point is, with that data, I would be able to figure out very easily what's going on, even if it's a complex problem. Now, I get it, it's not always that simple, but it's a heck of a lot more simple than this. Now we've got one of our classic Vortex Garage parts tables, and we're going to show you all the things that we've been picking up to do a major service on this vehicle. Since a lot of parts probably haven't been replaced in a while, we'd like to go ahead and do a major tune-up and a major service. You know, the hope is that doing that will solve this problem that we're seeing. So again, the hope is that those parts will lead us to a conclusion here, but if it doesn't, we face a much harder battle to figure out what's going on. And we'll kind of show you on the other camera a little bit, like let's say for instance it's the airflow meter or it's something wrong with the injectors or an errant sensor. Well, I can't just plug that computer in and get all those at once. I'm going to have to go system by system, component by component, and follow the tests. So let's take a look at a few examples of how I might go about doing that. So for instance, this is our airflow meter. This is not a mass airflow sensor. This is an airflow meter. It actually has a little vane inside, and it basically tracks how much air is coming in, and it uses that to calculate in the ECU how long to open the injectors and thus how much fuel to let in. So say you thought maybe this was bad. Well, you couldn't hook a scanner up and just say, hey, is this bad? What you'd have to do is take this part off. You'd have to tap into the electrical connectors, and you'd have to run the vane through its course and check the ohm meters and make sure that it's a nice smooth transition, that it's not jumpy. You know, a good example is, say, in the condition I'm seeing, when it kind of stutters and it seems like if I get on it harder, it pulls out of it more. Well, maybe the vanes in this get confused, and the airflow at that certain load and temperature confuses the ECU because it's getting a wonky signal out of that. Well, the only way to really know for sure is to have my ohm meter set up, and really an analog ohm meter so I can see the sweep and see how smooth the sweep is. Another example on the injectors, let's say we had a bad injector. The way these work, according to the service manual, is the rail is pressurized, and like most things, it's kind of like pulse width, is the ECU basically tells the injector solenoid how long to remain open, which then regulates how much fuel goes in. So say we had something wrong with the wiring or one of the solenoids, well, to test the injectors individually, you'd actually ohm test the solenoids. And of course, then you do get into dirty injectors and spray patterns and leaky O-rings and things like that. But a lot of that can be a little more visual, but you would have to electrically test that. Of course, you have coolant temp sensors that give an idea of how warm the engine is, and the ECU uses that data. You'd have to test those to make sure they're giving accurate readings all the time based on how hot it is. Well, there's just a lot of little things like that. Like I said, you'd have to go component by component and test. So if it comes to that individual component testing, here's where one thing is going to become extremely valuable, and that is some sort of a service manual. Now what I have here is a very basic service manual, something you can go get at your local parts store, and many of you have seen these Haynes manuals. And the owner was kind enough to include this in the car. He had bought one to do some work on it, and this is very handy. In fact, it is so handy. This is the Haynes manual from my 1980. It's actually the same manual, but when he asked if I needed it, I said, you know what, I wouldn't mind it because mine's seen better days. This was a very valuable tool on my 1980 that solved a lot of problems and made sure I knew how to put things together correctly and torque things right. But at the same time, this is 1968 through 1986, so of course they're missing a year, but we all know it'll count in 1987. But look at how thick that is. And that covers all the series of these XJ6s. So when you go to look for details on the fuel injection system, it's an addendum kind of at the end of the book, and it's like a page and a half of basic details on how it works and some basic troubleshooting. Way better than nothing, but kind of lacking in detail when you really get into the nitty-gritty. That's where this comes into play. This is really what I recommend. I mean, a Haynes manual is great, but if you want to make sure, if you're going to be working on your car and you're a pretty seasoned mechanic or hobbyist and you're comfortable doing some deep dives, get yourself a good service manual. This is a factory service manual reprint that I got off of eBay, and this is specifically for the Series 3 Jags. Now this does include the V12, so it does have some overlap, and it has the Daimlers as well, which is a different kind of like trim level, I guess you'd call it. It's a whole nother story, we won't get into it. But if you look at this, let's compare it to the Haynes manual. This is just for the Series 3, and this is for the Series 1 through 3. And this service manual is twice as thick. So when it comes to, for instance, reading up on the Lucas digital fuel injection on the Series 3 cars on the 6-cylinder, there are pages of details, including troubleshooting steps and all of the specific electrical functions that you need to test, including an ohm sweep on our air meter based on ambient temperature, ohm tests on the fuel injectors, all the various components, all the ambient temps and what those readings should be, all the steps to troubleshoot, basically everything you need. Also, our transmission kickdown, another example, that has pages of details, whereas the Haynes manual has a paragraph. So that service manual is going to be super helpful for us if we have to deep dive. Now again, we're hoping we don't have to, and let's take a look at why. Let's go check out our parts table. All right, so here's our parts table for the Jag, and like I said, we are amassing a lot of parts, so we can do a major service on several systems. We have some simple stuff like fuel filters and air filters, and we just did an oil service on it as well. But then we've got other things. So let's talk the elephant in the room, this big yellow Euro parts box. Now, I've always heard Euro to kind of be like the doorman of Europe and like kind of not the best quality all the time. And I didn't want to order a Euro mechanical fan clutch from Rock Auto, so I went and ordered the part from Moss Motors, and look what showed up, a Euro part. The same thing happened for the oil pressure sender that I got from Moss. And well, you have to tell me, what are your experiences with these parts? I guess I'll put them on and I'll know pretty soon what my experience is. Okay, in this box we've got a lot of things for a cooling system overhaul. You will see a few more Euro stickers, but I understand their hoses are pretty good. Plus, they do make some of the less popular molded ones. We do have a thermostat and a radiator cap, and we've also got a gasket for the thermostat housing. We've also got our transmission filter here. We're going to do a transmission service, give us a good chance to see how the fluid quality is, what's in the pan, and we'll have a fresh filter on it, and we've got some fresh Type F fluid to go with that. We've also got our engine and transmission mounts, which will, these are the rubber pieces for those, which are common to go. So basically anything rubber on the car, we wanted to go ahead and pick up. That goes for belts as well. Here's pretty much every belt the car could need. More gaskets when it makes sense. This is a breather gasket, so as we're tracking down oil stuff or we need to take something apart, we got the gasket. But the big one that we're going to need, these are a seal that goes on the pinion of the rack and pinion. So this should hopefully solve that seal. I picked two up so I could have one on the shelf for later if I need it. Major ignition service here. We've got a new Lucas coil. We've got NGK spark plug set, new spark plugs, cap and rotor. And this AC Delco box, well, this is actually what's hiding inside the $250 Lucas ignition amplifier. We'll do a separate video on that, but this is basically a standard GM HEI module. That's really all that's in there except for a Zener diode and a condenser. Aside from that, we've got plenty of gaskets, so anything we pull apart or any oil leaks that we find, we can go ahead and take care of them. We'll have fresh seals and fresh gaskets. So with all of this, I guess we'll find out if doing a tune-up on the vehicle and going through our parts table is going to kind of kick this thing into shape and then be trouble-free for ages to come, or if this is just a precursor of the fact that this car is going to be in constant need of attention. And this will be very valuable for some of you who maybe aren't so inclined to do the work yourselves, because a lot of these things that we're going to embark on, especially if I have to do deep dive troubleshooting, sometimes that can be an open checkbook to your mechanic. So something good to bear in mind when you look at one of these cars. But we'll definitely share that with you as we go along. So if you're interested, give us a like, comment, and of course a subscribe, because we've got this and many other projects that we'll be sharing here on Vortex Garage.